Hello and welcome to the 25th Vermont Grazing and Livestock Conference. I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. I would like to thank the National Grazing Lands Coalition, Food Animal Concerns Trust, Morrison's Custom Feeds, Rural Vermont, and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I would also like to thank our partners. I would like to thank the United States Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and the National Resources Conservation Service. I would also like to thank Cedar Tree Foundation and the Forrest C. and Francis H. Latner Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the 25th Grazing and Livestock Conference. The conference is brought to you by the University of Vermont Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture and the Vermont Grass Farmers Association. Enjoy the content. Hello, everybody. I am Megan Sheridan. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Grass Farmers Association. And I thank you for joining this session. I'd like to introduce Jake and get it kicked off. So Jake Jacobs is the Educational Coordinator for the UVM Agricultural Risk Management and Crop Insurance Education. So take it away, Jake. You're gonna share your slides. Yeah, so we'll.
Thank you. And welcome to everybody who has joined us this morning. Great conference. And we're all really reaping the benefit of staying remote and having a really good technical session available to us. So thanks so much, Megan. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. We have some hard stops, so I want to make sure I get through this basic information. And I will do my best to allow time for questions at the end. But I'll just remind folks of two things. First of all, please be sure to submit some questions so we can get them answered. If we can't get to them during the session, I will certainly do my best to reply to everybody following the session. So hopefully we'll get that covered. I also want to bring your attention to the polls section. And it's one of those options up on, I believe it's on the right. So please take time at the end of the session. It's just a couple of very quick questions. You're going to click on a couple of stars for your experience and what you've learned. And we would really appreciate it if you would participate in that and just check that off before you actually leave the meeting. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to be talking about today and sharing with you is some information on an insurance program that's provided by USDA. It's been around for a number of years, but they've just made some changes to the provisions that makes this suddenly more accessible for producers who are selling to direct markets in particular. So let me tell you a little bit about the program. I work for the University of Vermont, and I'm the director of the Agricultural Risk Management and Crop Insurance Education Program. There's a website that has links and resource information on all kinds of topics related to agricultural risk. And I'll give you that address at the end. We can also add it to the chat. And I would encourage you to visit and just see if there's something there that applies to your farming situation. But let's get into the meat of this topic. First of all, if you're watching, you already know that farming happens to be a pretty high risk business. And between the changes environmentally and what we've been seeing in weather and environmental risk, as well as all the marketing and related risks, we've all been dealing with some pretty big surprises over the last few years. There are basically 5 areas of agricultural risk that can put any farm in peril: production risk, marketing risk, financial risk, legal risk, and human risk. And what we're going to be focusing on right now is production risk and marketing risk, because these are the areas that you can get covered by crop insurance. Crop insurance does not cover the things that you have your farm insurance for, such as, potential damage to buildings or liability when people come to visit your premises. Crop insurance and crop revenue insurance is strictly related to the commodities that you produce on your farm. And production risk basically comes down to, what are our crop yields going to be this year? And what we look at the most for perils are the environmental situations that land. If it's a particularly dry year, a wet year, there are a number of perils that can actually damage your farm enterprise. It can also cover some pest damage, maybe wildlife damage, but those are the factors that are going to impact how much you get, the actual quantity, your yield, but it can also have an impact on the quality of the commodities that you produce. So I'm going to give you an example. Let me tell you first briefly, marketing and revenue risk is basically asking, are we going to be able to sell what we produce for a fair and sustainable price? And yes, all of the things pictured are commodities that are covered by crop insurance, plus quite a few more that are not pictured, although I do not know too many oyster growers here in Vermont. So let me give you an example between the two. This is a listing of how USDA grades apples. And at the top of the list is US Extra Fancy. And for obvious reasons, that commands the highest price in the market. And as you work your way down the list, down to US Utility, US Utility grade apples would be used for processing and things like applesauce and juices. And obviously, as you go down that list, the commanding price in the market is a little bit lower. So let's say that there was an event like a hail event or something like that. And if the damage did not cause a yield loss, in other words, if you still got the same number of bushels out of your orchard, then you're not going to get an indemnity payment for a loss. However, if you have a revenue policy, damage to fruit may in fact still be covered, because although the yield did not get affected, the actual market price was impacted. So by getting that lower price, what you're ensuring is the expected income level, and those producers would in fact get an indemnity payment for the loss. So along comes whole farm revenue protection, which we're going to abbreviate as WFRP. And this came out with the 2014 Farm Bill. It was a new policy with that Farm Bill. And it provides a risk management safety net designed to cover all of the commodities that are produced on a given farm under a single insurance policy, as opposed to having separate insurance policies for each commodity that's produced. And it's available in all counties nationwide. That cannot be said for all the other commodity insurance programs. So whole farm revenue protection includes products that are produced for the specialty market. It also will cover organic production, and there are price differentials for conventional production practices versus organic. And the policies are designed to insure up to $8.5 million in insured revenue. The policy was designed to cover those producers who were marketing to their local markets. So that would include things like farm stands and farmers markets and CSAs. Unfortunately, those three that you see across the top were not very well covered by the policy. And part of the reason was the farmers who are selling to those direct markets typically don't have the kind of retail receipts for their sales that were acceptable for the insurance. They couldn't really verify the sales in the way that the policy required. Another problem that came with this policy is there was an immense amount of paperwork. There were a lot of historic records that had to be provided, as well as all the production and retail receipts. And what we were finding is there were a lot of agents who were refusing to write the policies. So the program was not well received across the nation. But in the 2018 Farm Bill, there was really additional language that really insisted on more insurance options for producers who were not getting coverage, who were not eligible for various insurance programs. So they changed some of the training for the licensed agents and reduced the record requirements. But the biggest change that was just enacted and made available starting in October of 2020 is that they added some new provisions specifically developed for those producers who had diversified commodities and are selling through direct retail markets. That has not been available before. WFRP is designed to protect the farm's adjusted gross revenue that is actually earned or expected to be earned. And I described that example with the apples. It provides revenue protection for a single farm commodity. So if you only have one commodity, that's fine. You can still use this revenue insurance. But it really has some advantages for those who have multiple commodities on their operation. And of course, we find in the Northeast, this is a pretty common farming practice to have diversified operations. The number of commodities that are produced will affect the coverage that you're able to get and the subsidy levels to help you cover your premiums. And this chart just shows what those figures would be. So if you look at that top light green line, if you have one commodity that you want to cover under WFRP, that's fine, you can do that. And let's say if you look at the top line, you want the maximum coverage. You can cover up to 75% of your crop. If you have one commodity, 55% of your premium is going to be subsidized. Now, we recognize that diversification is one way to help you manage your risk. That practice alone minimizes the overall farm losses. For example, if one crop has a reduced yield that year, hopefully something else that's produced on the farm is going to help to make up some of that difference and stabilize that operations revenue. So if you go to the second line down, the medium green, if you are covering two commodities, again, say at the 75% level, you're picking up some of the risk on that. So you can get your premium subsidized at a rate of 80%. If you have three or more commodities, not only do you have that same opportunity at the 75% level, but because your increased diversification further reduces your risk, you can also get coverage for a higher percentage of your coverage. Now, this is what gets a little bit tricky, and we're not going to be looking first at the direct market producer. As I said, diversification is one way that you are reducing risk on your operation. But each commodity in this policy is going to be weighted by the percentage of the revenue that it actually contributes to your total income. And in these pictures, I was just trying to illustrate. The picture on the left is a commercial wholesaler, and they grow a boatload of pumpkins, and they have that as a major contributing factor to the overall farm revenue, as opposed to the producer on the right who's selling at a farmer's market to a direct market, And pumpkins are just one small component of the many commodities that they're selling. So obviously, the farm on the left is going to have a greater percentage of their revenue produced by pumpkins than the producer on the right. So we now shift to the producers who are selling to those direct markets. And that includes, as we said, farmers markets, farm stands, CSA, U-pick operations, any place where you're doing the direct marketing. And now they can enroll in whole farm revenue protection. The new commodity code that they have is referred to as other combined direct marketing. So you notice it's not listing a single commodity name. It's clumping them together. In order to qualify, the farm must have 2 or more commodities that they produce and sell through a direct market. And all direct market commodities are grouped together, and the farm will be eligible for premium and subsidy benefits for 2 commodity diversification. Even if you have more than 2, that particular category will still only make you eligible for premium and subsidy benefits for 2 commodities. So if you want to find out more about this and you decide you're going to enroll, you can only enroll with a licensed crop insurance agent. So sometimes people ask me, well, where is my nearest crop insurance office? I'm guessing that most of you know where your nearby FSA office is. And there's one in almost every county. Your closest risk management agency office, which is the USDA agency that covers crop insurance and administers those programs, it's in Raleigh, North Carolina. So you actually have to work through a local agent in order to sign up for crop insurance and have your policy serviced. Excuse me. You will have to prepare certain records in order to enroll, and that's going to include your Schedule F tax records. It's also going to include an intended 2021 farm plan, and that's where you're actually declaring what you're planning on planting, the acreage, what your expected yields will be, and so on. You will have to produce production expense records, what is actually costing you to put in your crops. And then you have to come up with verifiable sales records. There are some additional records in certain circumstances. For example, if you have animals or animal products, or if you have greenhouses and you're selling nursery products, you have to complete an inventory report at the beginning of the insurance period, and then you have to update it at the end of the insurance period. If you carry accounts receivable and payable, you have to provide a report of that. In order to receive premium subsidies, you have to be conservation compliant. So that means with FSA office, you have to have your Form AD 1026 on file and up to date. And if you're going to insure revenue from perennial crops, the agent is probably going to have to come and visit the farm and complete some additional paperwork for that. You can get some additional information, really quickly if you go to the RMA website. I visited just to update this. Their most recent fact sheet on the program is from August 2019. So that doesn't have the details of this new commodity count code for those diversified operations selling to direct markets. But on the UVM Ag Risk website, we do have an updated web sheet that includes that information. So if you pull up that fact sheet, this bottom one shows you what it looks like. It is attached. So if you go into the HUVA site, you can download that, or you can go to the UVM Ag Risk website. So that will give you a little more information, and it also includes some examples. And as I said, you have to do this all through a licensed crop insurance agent. And there is a list of agents who are licensed to sell crop insurance in your state on the RMA website through an agent locator, and instructions for doing that on the UVM website. And I would be happy to walk anybody through downloading that and getting the information they need so they can find an agent. I think one of the easiest things is to contact a neighbor who already has crop insurance and find out who they're using. Whichever agent you use, the products are the same, the prices are the same. So what you're doing is you're making a selection based on who's going to best serve your needs and help you service the product. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for any questions or comments. I'll remind you again to visit the poll. See all the hands raised. There are obviously a lot of questions.
All right, why don't we also bring in Josh? So Josh, if you can unmute yourself and put your video on, and Jake, if you want to.
The last thing I'll do before I stop sharing, I just want to make sure everybody has my email address, which in this pandemic time of everybody being remote, email is the best way to reach me right now. And there's the website address as well. And I think that Josh, who was just joining us, Josh is a colleague of mine at UVM, and he works with me on some outreach and some support of farmer services in ag risk. Josh, if you could add this website to the chat, I think that.
Yeah, I've already put the website in the chat, and I'm just waiting to see if we get any questions from y'all.
Okay, very good. I did try to answer a few questions online this morning, so hopefully, you know, we're on top of the issues that folks may have. And I'm going to pull this off and just see if anybody has any other comment or something that they'd like to share.
So if you have any questions, again, put them in the Q&A tab, and then we can see them and answer those questions. Do you want to address the two questions that you replied to already, Jake? They're in there.
Oh, sure. I would be happy to do that. If you could just share the question, and then I'll see if the answer I give now is the same as what I entered on the computer.
So the first question is, are there options for agritourism as well as diversified crops?
That's a great question. And there's often a lot of confusion about where that line is for crop insurance. Crop insurance and any of those federal programs for crops, which would include the FSA disaster assistance programs, those will only cover the actual commodities that are produced. So it's for actual losses that you experience in the market or revenue or yield, but they will not cover the other things that go on your farm. I think that my understanding is agritourism would be covered by your other insurance policies. So wherever you have your insurance for liability coverage, you know, home and farm and auto and that kind of thing. If you have farm liability coverage, I think it would be covered under that. Crop insurance only covers the actual commodities.
Just for clarification on that for me, so I understand it as well. So you couldn't, there's no coverage for a loss of agritourism sales.
No, because that's a good question. There's not actually a commodity that's produced.
There's no
Although
mechanism.
It's an important piece of your farm revenue. I don't know if insurance companies offer that, you know, tied in with your farm coverage or your liability coverage.
A loss of revenues. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Right. And just, you know, for an overview, the whole point of crop insurance and the federal support of that is to try to provide a little security to our food system. It's supposed to help stabilize the farming market to some extent and to keep farmers in business when these risk events happen. So it's really based on commodity coverage only.
Great. And our next question that we have in the Q&A is, how does loss get calculated in regards to livestock?
That's a complicated question because there are a number of livestock programs. I'm going to take an example. If we're looking at whole farm revenue protection, and let's assume the producer is growing, say, beef or swine or sheep for meat. What they're going to do in their estimates is they're going to be projecting what their estimates are for what they're going to earn from the sale of their, however they market. I'm assuming, in most cases, it's going to be live animals. In some cases, it's going to be, actually, that's true. I'm not sure if the policy covers the animals once they've been processed. And that would be a question for the insurance agent. Basically, any of the federal programs for commodity coverage do not cover processing. Perfect example, they will cover maple sap, but they won't cover maple syrup. They'll cover your berries, but they won't cover your jams and jellies. So if that makes sense. I'm not sure where that stands on meat, because meat products are one of the commodities listed in whole farm. So an insurance agent would have to answer that. But let's go back to the example of selling, say, live animals. You're going to have an estimated value of the meat that's going to be sold. And then at the end of your season, or in this case, you're talking about a perennial crop, you're probably going to have to be doing your inventory at the beginning and your inventory at the end. And then the crop loss would be any difference between what you anticipated getting for your meat sales during that year versus what you actually got. This whole farm revenue protection policy came on the market to replace some other multiple commodity products that were around before the 2014 Farm Bill. But they found that the record keeping was just a little too scattered. It was very hard for them to identify claims properly. And that's why this WFRP was developed, hopefully to provide for real loss coverage when farmers experience that. We have found that since it was released in 2014, it has not been well received across the board, but in certain specialty markets, it's been great. It's been a terrific product. And especially in diversified operations that sell not necessarily to direct market. Those direct marketers have really been excluded from it because of the provisions requiring the verifiable receipts. And we're hoping that the changes that they instituted in these last few months will open that door for farmers who are selling to those direct markets. That's the intention, and we're hoping the provisions cover that.
We're not getting any other questions at the moment. I'd encourage you all to take advantage of the rest of our time here, and also I'll encourage you all to go to the polls box and answer just a couple really quick questions to help us understand what you're getting out of this presentation.
I want to add too that there are a variety of other federal crop insurance programs that are available. This whole farm revenue protection is only one. So for those who are growing, say, forages, I'll just give you this is just one example. There's a pasture and forage insurance program that just covers forages that are grown for your feed or for sale. There are commodity programs for a lot of other individual commodities that you may produce on your farm. So I would be more than happy to have a conversation with anybody about those. I just wanted to focus this morning on this whole farm option because they have changed the provisions to make it more encompassing. And I know that there are a lot of folks who participate in this conference who are selling to direct markets. So that's why we wanted to make sure we focused on that.
And
the federal crop insurance program was developed actually back in the 30s in response to the Dust Bowl, when there were such horrific crop losses, and the security of the food system in the entire nation was impacted dramatically. And that's when they started paying to help farmers get back on their feet and be able to continue in farming. It's evolved quite a lot over the years. Megan, did I see you had a comment or a question?
there's another question that's just come in the chat. Can you see that, Josh? It's
Yeah. Can you provide an example of how much the insurance would cost for a small farm?
Wow. That's a pretty hard question. And I'm not trying to shirk it, but what you have to look at is what would how would that fit into the commodity count on the farm? How many commodities do you have so you could get the maximum subsidy support? And what would be the percentage of the total revenue for the farm? What I am going to encourage you to do is pull up the fact sheet. It's in Whova, so you can pull it up there, or you can go directly to the UVM AgRisk website and pull it up there, because there are a couple of examples right on that. I wish I could just say, oh, you have so many acres of X, and here's what the premium would be. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to shirk your question, but it's a pretty complicated answer. I think actually that's one of the reasons that some of the agents probably haven't wanted to write the policies, because it is so complicated. It takes quite a bit of time for them to sort that out.
Is it inappropriate? Like we have an insurance agent who is at the conference.
Yes.
Is it inappropriate to mention that, so?
Well, actually, I'm going to ask, I can, from the view that I have as a presenter, I can't see who's participating. Are there any crop insurance agents in this audience today? If you could flag that to Megan and Josh. And maybe not today. Yes, I would say you can certainly pose your questions about farm insurance to the agent that's here. But I don't think he covers crop insurance. I don't think he's licensed for crop insurance. So
we've got a question here. Sort of a comment, I guess. It says Fraser Insurance Agency doesn't sell crop. We refer to Arthur Carroll Agency.
Okay.
So Stuart from Fraser Agency is here, and you could visit his virtual booth and ask him those kind of agent questions.
Right. And, as he said, he refers inquiries about crop insurance and the federal programs to another agent who is licensed. To find that list, if you go to the RMA website, the federal USDA RMA.gov, there'll be a tab there for you to click on for an agent locator. And you can generate a list of agents who are licensed to sell in your state. So you can narrow it down. If you don't put a limit on the geography, you're going to get agents from all over the country. The fact is, some of them are not direct policy writers, but if they have anything to do with the underwriting procedures, they have to be licensed. So in fact, you're going to get a huge list. I know the Vermont list is somewhere between 50 and 80 agents. They're all licensed, but not all of them actually provide service directly to producers. It's a little bit of a cumbersome system. And again, I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone about that and help you narrow it down to find out the ones who really are selling insurance in Vermont. Great. Now, did you ever go to something and get frustrated because it ran over time and you had to choose where to go? Megan doesn't let that happen. This is just too efficient. So if there are not any other questions, I'm going to leave it to Megan and Josh to kind of wrap things up and do whatever final housekeeping we have. But please feel free to contact me through the chat. Go to the Ag Risk, I guess you would still call it a trade booth, even though it's virtual. And I've been answering questions throughout this weekend. So if you want to contact me, you can do it through there. You can shoot me an email. I really am pretty good at getting back to people, even if my answer doesn't make sense.
Thank you very much, Jake and Josh. This was great. And yeah, as Jake said, those question and answer places are open throughout the whole conference. So if you think of something else you want to ask Jake, you have a number of options of getting connected to her. You can go to the virtual trade booth at the conference, or you can come back to this session and you can put it in the Q&A or the chat, and she can come back and review those and respond to you. So you have a number of ways to get in contact with her. And also, I just want to bring your attention. So as we pull this to a close, thinking about the next sessions. So the next sessions start at 11. There is the soil samples for hay fields and pastures. And there is the hypes and gripes of guard animals. So that is happening at 11 o'clock. So thank you very much.
And I'll interject before we close. We've got another question that came in. Are you still with us, Jake?
I sure am, yeah.
Great. So can ag policies be purchased across state lines, or are they like other insurances that cannot?
Crop insurance is going to cover where you farm. As long as the license for the agent crosses those lines, it shouldn't be a problem. As far as your farm insurance is concerned, that would probably be a good question for an insurance agent. As I say, Stuart is here and you can visit him and ask those questions. But for crop insurance coverage, it's not uncommon, especially here in the Northeast. Our states are small. There are a lot of farmers who are farming over state lines, and they can still get the coverage.
And also, as a follow-up, Stuart put in the chat box, first of all, great job, Jake. And also, property and casualty coverage on a farm policy does offer coverage for the harvested crops. So where crop insurance drops off, farm policy can pick up.
Oh, that's great. Good to know. So we'll have to get a crop insurance agent tied up with Stuart, and then they can do the whole package. It's complicated. It's really hard when you're trying to balance risk coverage for your operation, and you're also you have to deal with the expense of it and what it's going to cost. The subsidies aren't going to cover 100%, but they make a big difference. And that's important to remember. Okay, we're good. I'll come back to the session even when it's done, looking for some additional questions or comments.
Great. Thank you both very much for this very informative session.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Megan.
you.
Everybody, we'll see you in later sessions.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.